Good evening.
Evening, how are you?
I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can start by introducing yourself. I'm Dennis, by the way.
Okay, so my name is Lavender Namdiero, and I work for SDG2, Sustainable Development to Advocacy Hub. So we focus more on addressing the issue of hunger and malnutrition, not just in Africa, but globally. So I'm the lead campaigner in Africa.
In-
So the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them that were actually developed after the Millennium Development Goals after 2015. So there are a set of goals that all countries that have signed to the UN are supposed to achieve. So they're different. So SDG2 deals with zero hunger. There are other goals that deal with education, that deal with health, that deal with the environment. So the whole idea is by 2030, all countries or all member states should have achieved those goals. So SDG2 is ending hunger by 2030.
You say you are the lead campaign for the SDG Zero Hunger in Africa. So tell us how can we maintain food and how can we produce food to fight hunger?
Okay, so I think before you even think about the solutions on how to end hunger and malnutrition, you first have to understand what are the main causes. And the very first one I could think of is climate change. As much as it's a natural occurrence, we see that it's been really exacerbated by human activities. So we're seeing more cases of drought, we're seeing more cases of flooding. So to be able to address the issue of hunger and malnutrition, it's always good to understand what are the main causes to start with. So the very biggest issue we're facing right now is climate change and its impact in terms of agriculture. So we are seeing extreme weather patterns in different parts of the world. Kenya is no exception. We're experiencing drought, flooding, just extreme temperatures in different parts of the country. And this has affected smallholder farmers because they don't really have the capacity to deal with climate change. So that's one of them. Another thing is conflict. So conflict breeds hunger and malnutrition. If we look, for example, what's happening in Gaza, some of the families have been cut from accessing food, from even the humanitarian support. So whenever we have conflict, look at DRC, people are bound to starve. So poverty plays a huge role as well when it comes to accessing food. The country might have food in the markets, but if I live below the poverty line, if I don't have money to buy food, my kids, I'm not able to support my kids in terms of even nutritious foods. I might be able to just get basic food, but not necessarily nutritious food. And then the lack of support to smallholder farmers is also a huge issue. If they're not able to, if they're able to produce food but not able to access the markets, maybe due to poor infrastructure. So those are the main issues that we look at. So as NGOs or as civil society working to address the issue of hunger, there are different ways that they can come in. One of them is through research. So research will really help, for example, understanding with climate change, are we able to somehow empower smallholder farmers to understand which are the drought-resistant crops, for example, that they could grow? Can we maybe work with the government in terms of this is how you can support smallholder farmers by giving them the knowledge that they need, that they don't necessarily have to rely on rainfall. They could find other ways to really improve the agricultural production, and understanding this in terms of the entire value chain, right from production up to the market. Another thing that we could do is just empower smallholder farmers themselves, working with CBOs, especially women and indigenous people. We've seen indigenous people have the knowledge from their ancestors. They understood climate change even before they could utter the word climate change, because it's something that they've understood for years. So working with indigenous people, really leveraging on the knowledge that they have is really powerful. And also women, we see that majority of smallholder farmers are women, even in Kenya, and in most parts of the world. But we tend to see that many women cannot even access their own land. Okay, there are lots of cultural issues when it comes to that. So just empowering them in that sense. But then also young people. When we look at farmers, they're aging. So at what point will we get young people into that space where they're the ones who will start producing crops? Because we need to start making agriculture cool. It'll reach a point where we don't have any farmers because everyone wants to do either digital work, but not really on food security. So that's one of them. But then the main thing I think is investment in agriculture and development. So the African Union came up with a framework called the Africa Agriculture Development Program. And this framework really tries to get African member states to commit at least 10% of their national budget into agriculture and development. And this figure, they discussed it back and forth in different declarations, the Malabo and the Maputo, and they have actually recommitted to the principle and values of this program because they see that with this 10%, they'll be able to address smallholder farmers, address the value chain issues that I talked about, but somehow ensure that there's actually food sovereignty in Africa. So if an NGO can actually push for accountability in terms of just reminding the states, the African states, member states, that you committed to this, can we constantly even do inventories of the budgets each year, reminding them you need to at least put 10%. And encourage governments that are actually doing that in that case.
And in Kenya specifically, are we achieving the 10%?
Kenya has not achieved. In fact, the last African Union summit, they said it was Rwanda that was close enough to achieving the CADEP framework. So Kenya is still far behind, though we've had different initiatives in Kenya. So for example, the school feeding program that was introduced in Kenya, we're still far because we still hear of communities where there's yearly flooding, like in Budalangi. They go without food. Places that are very marginalized, Wajir, Lodwar, Garissa, the likes, Turkana, we always see families starving. Yeah. So I wouldn't say we've definitely not reached there. 2030 is very soon. There's a lot that needs to be done. But with all the initiatives that are going, I still think it's possible. Kenya has the potential to feed its people.
You're talking about food hunger. We also have malnutrition on the other end. So we can actually have food. Is there a possibility that we can have food, but the food isn't the correct food to have?
Yeah, that's very possible. So when we look at food sovereignty, and that's the beauty of how Africa defines food sovereignty, we don't speak of it in terms of food security, because the West, when they speak about food security, they can bring for you burgers, and for you, a burger might not even be culturally appropriate. If you take, for example, just maize to a community, let's say in Lodwar, that's starving, are we giving them nutritious foods? Do we ensure that they have a balanced diet, proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins and all that? So it's very crucial when we're talking about food sovereignty. We're looking at it in terms of, is it culturally appropriate, for example? I'm not going to take pork to a Muslim community and just say, this is food, you have to eat it. I need to be sensitive to that. If I'm going to do a school feeding program, I'm looking at different children, different ages, okay? So the younger age will definitely require different nutritious element from the adolescents. For example, girls who have just started their menstruation, they lose a lot of blood, so they need a lot of iron, okay? So that food also needs to ensure that we include such things. So just having food in general does not close the book and say we've achieved food security. Malnutrition has to be
part of it.
Has to be part of it.
Okay.
For you to say that you're food secure in that sense.
And in this journey that we have in food security and malnutrition, do you think there's a possibility that we are doing enough, or rather is the government doing enough to ensure that farmers and those who produce such are actually getting what they need to produce food?
Yeah, so if you look at the example of Kenya, I would say that one administration will come in with a policy that's trying to address food security, but then we'll have another administration that will change the policy completely. So what we lack for sure is inconsistency. Currently, we have a president who was he's a farmer. He was a former Minister of Agriculture. So he understands the needs of farmers. So if I think he's to really focus, and his manifesto also had an entity on food security. I think if he has the best advisors on food security, he's able to understand the needs of smallholder farmers. And with time, because these things don't just happen overnight, it takes a lot of time to empower these smallholder farmers. It takes a lot of time to invest. And this has to be consistent. We, I think, are moving towards being not necessarily on the right track, but we're moving towards like addressing some of these issues. We had recently had the Africa Climate Summit. It's the very first climate summit in Africa.
In Africa.
We never used to talk about climate change. So for me, in that way, we're starting to acknowledge that climate change is not just a Western thing. African states and less developed countries are the ones that are hit the hardest in terms of climate change. So in a way, just the fact that we recognize these small things, the fact that we have these initiatives like the school feeding programs, the fact that we're starting to acknowledge indigenous people's knowledge and women's rights, especially in terms of ownership of land and the likes, we are heading somewhere, but we're not there yet. Definitely not there yet. As an NGO, you have a lot of power in terms of the voice that you have. You have the ability to even investigate, like when I talk about the budgeting process, you're able to actually do some research and find out, are our countries actually doing what they're committing out there and calling them out? If you have that platform as an NGO, if your mandate as an NGO is to provide research, you're able to actually use that research you can partner with the government and say, we've done this research on, let's say, livestock. This is the best way to produce. It's safe. You don't have to use, for example, GMOs and the likes. Another thing that you can do as an NGO is just accountability, calling for accountability, because NGOs almost work like the opposition when you look at politics. Okay, so you have the people in power, but then the opposition are like the watchdogs. Like, you guys are promising this, but are you achieving this? So NGOs have quite a lot of work to do, and I think they should never be derailed in terms of feeling scared to use the resources that they have, the voices that they have. For example, I would assume, like the NGO that you're working with, you have investors, you have donors, and the donors say, you can't speak about this and you can't speak about this, but you know that this is a problem. So now you have the moral obligation to decide if this is what's causing the problem in Africa or in Kenya, you need to speak about it. So that's actually now the call NGOs have in terms of addressing food security in Africa.
Okay, and what do farmers need to do? What do they need to do to fight food hunger and actually produce nutritious food?
Farmers have one of the biggest roles and biggest challenges at the same time. What I would say farmers need to do is somehow get the current knowledge on how to practice climate smart agriculture. Because when in the days where we would rely on rainfall, like before, we knew the seasons, we'd only plant, for example, one crop and rely on maize and say that if we don't have maize, we can't eat. We have to farmers, smallholder farmers now have to be in that space of, okay, what other crops can we grow? And also try and go beyond the cultural expectations. So we have sometimes an issue, I think, in Kenya where you say, I'm from this ethnic group, so I'm expected to grow a certain kind of crop. Why not try different crops? If you've never tried potatoes, for example, beans are very nutritious, but we hardly see beans being produced, for example, in Western Kenya. I could be wrong, but it's an observation that I've seen. So different types of beans, they're quite resilient as well, very nutritious, high rich in protein, in iron, and so many other nutritious benefits. What if we start to see farmers exploring different kind of farming practices that are safe for the soil, where you can actually gain the skills in land management, soil management, different crop rotations, I think I saw a video recently where one of the farmers doesn't just rely on the stream for water, that he's able to actually reserve the water. And year long, he has access to water. So those are the things that they need. But at the same time, the government needs to really invest on smallholder farmers, because like I said, poverty plays a huge role in it. They might want to gain all these things that I've talked about, the knowledge and the skills, but they might not necessarily be able to do it. So that's where NGOs come in to provide this kind of knowledge. That's where the government would come in, maybe partner with NGOs or even small, the CBOs, and give them that knowledge that they need to do that. So but let's not, should I say, put the burden on smallholder farmers, okay? For them, it's just one, recognizing that they're the ones who hold this economy in Kenya. And if they hold this economy in Kenya, do our leaders have that political will to actually support them? Because they're the food basket of Kenya. The government comes in very crucially when we're looking at the value chain, right from production up to the market. When we look at food sovereignty, we're looking at it in different ways. So I talked about the cultural adequacy, but then we also look at affordability, we look at accessibility. This farmer that you've talked about, he probably has very, green, nutritious cabbages, potatoes, beans. But then what does he do with them? The market is probably 7 kilometers away. The road is probably
very bad.
Very bad. He might not have the proper transportation. So this food goes bad. So how the government comes in is to ensure, one, that there's infrastructure, okay? That this farmer is able to take his produce from A to B. And then even when he takes it to B, he's not going to fight with cartels for good market prices. Okay, so he doesn't go at a loss. So that regulation also has to be ensured in that sense. So we start to encourage more farmers to be able to take it to the market. Then there's some kind of really competitiveness for these smallholder farmers, and it gives them some kind of motivation to produce more. There's also some kind of support the government can give in terms of storage, for example, for seeds or for produce that is produced. But then also, when you talk about markets, there was a time, I think I might be wrong, maybe 2007 or 2008, where would find central Kenya is producing so much food, they're giving it to the livestock, and many people across the country don't have access because of the logistics.
Yeah.
So in such a case, fine, farmers might take it to the market in central Kenya. But then the demand is very low. The demand outside central Kenya is high. So that logistics is also very crucial. So it's not just from the farm to the market, but also from that market to other markets as well that we need to look at. So that's now where the government comes in. What kind of subsidies are they able to give for the different farmers? Why not, why not invest in transportation to help this produce move from different parts of the country rather than it getting spoiled? So it's a complex web, but I think, many African countries have managed to do it. Why not us? Yeah.
Okay, now on one hand we have the government, on the other hand we have farmers.
Yes.
Now, in between we have intermediaries or other middlemen.
Yes.
You find middlemen, they exploit the farmers on one hand, and also exploit the government on the other hand. So what really is the purpose of these intermediaries, and what role should these intermediaries do?
Well, one, they need to be checked. If you ask me, I don't think we need the middlemen. Or if we're to have the middlemen, I think it's more for quality control that they should play a part in. They need to be regulated. At the moment, we have so many issues surrounding corruption, impunity. So if I think that is checked, we'll be able to have genuine middlemen who have the interest of both the smallholder farmers.
Yeah, because we may pointing a finger to the government.
Exactly.
And the problem is not the government.
The problem might not be the government, but who has the power over the cartels? Okay? Who has the responsibility of the cartels? So at the end of the day, we have to hold the government accountable to it, because they are the ones who regulate state actors and non-state actors. And the cartels being non-state actors, the government has to check them. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, sometimes you even find the middlemen are part of the government.
The government.
Exactly.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's been a nice chat
Thank you.
around food hunger, and I hope we have learned a lot. And whoever is going to watch the video, it may help in one way or the other. Thank you again for welcoming us to your home.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.